Northwest Insurance. Auto, business, home, and more. Who said insurance was born? Protect your car, protect your family. Northwest Insurance. If you need a helpful team, the best in the community. Grab your phone, what are you waiting for? Northwest Insurance. Northwest Insurance.
Hola. Welcome to the latest episode of Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas. I'm your host, Mark Diasana, and joining me as always is my sister from another mister, my BFF, marketing manager for Northwest Insurance. She runs on caffeine and Jewish pride. It's my BFF, Lila Levy, your fearless guide. Hey, Lila, what's going on?
Hey, how are you? Shalom.
Hola to you, my
Hola.
What's been going on?
I'm just excited to be here for another podcast episode. I've got something special to drink today.
To detail, what do you have
Today. Okay. And it's not so much about what I'm drinking, but it's what I'm drinking it in.
Okay. What
Okay.
What are you drinking and what are you drinking it in?
So I'm drinking some iced tea today,
Okay.
but I'm drinking it in a thermos.
Why
Okay.
why I think I know why, but why a thermos?
Because it relates directly to our very exciting guest today and her line of work. And it's very reminiscent. And I know you're going to introduce her in a few minutes, but it's very reminiscent of like Telly Savalas, Kojak, that time period.
Crime drama. Yeah.
Yeah. And when there was, people had, lousy coffee in a thermos.
That does. I mean, our guest, I bet she's worn a trench coat and probably smoked a cigar and went door to door at one time and asked.
And had lousy coffee.
And I do, after hearing her story, I picture her as actually more a sleuth than their actual occupation.
Yeah.
Well, we will get into all that.
Yeah.
What else has been going on in the week?
I've for all our insurance voyeurs who listen to our
junkies.
Yes, the junkies out there who listen to our podcast with bated breath, they know that when they watched the last podcast we recorded with Juan and Brent Reeves as our guests, I was just back from New York. So I'm back 1 week late, 1 week more than last week, and just continuing to get acclimated to. I need to unpack first of all.
Well, I know you're losing that Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, my mom would be proud.
So have you gone through show withdrawal? Because I know when you were in New York, you saw, was it 27 shows?
I saw
one days.
Yeah.
That borders on weird, but
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lila.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello.
My bad. So have you seen any shows here in Texas?
Yeah.
In Dallas.
Yeah, I saw 2 this past weekend.
So how let down were you?
But I wasn't let down because you have to realize where you are, that you're in community theater or city theater. I saw Xanadu, which I'd never seen before at Theater 3, which was great. My friend Max Swarmer was in it, and it was, very 70s, 80s. And then I saw Oklahoma at Firehouse in Farmers Branch, which I'd seen one time a few years ago, and it was really weird the way how they did it. So I saw it in its very traditional sense this past weekend. But you just have to, I have to realize that I'm not on, 45th Street seeing The Outsiders when I see Oklahoma, on Valley View Lane and Farmers Branch.
Translation, they suck.
No, I didn't say that.
That's what I'm hearing.
I didn't say that. Okay, let's move on.
All right, let's get to our tantalizing subject. We got so many requests for this one, Lila.
I know.
Servers are blowing up.
Oh, yeah.
People just are just pounding us with emails about this type of insurance, okay? So today we're going to talk about cyber liability insurance. And we're going to talk about it because it really is relative to our guest. With kind of sensitive what our guest says, that she's involved in crime. She's not a criminal, but she's involved in crime of some sort. But
good clarification.
Right, I want to make sure that's clear. I don't want to slander her because I'll need my insurance. So today we're talking about cyber liability insurance. And cyber liability insurance, it's like a digital bodyguard for your business. It steps in when hackers, ransomware, or accidental data leaks or threaten your operations, reputation, or your bottom line. Whether you're a podcaster, like our guest is, and like you are, Lila, or whether you're storing sensitive interviews, or if you're a producer who's managing digital assets, or if you're a small business handling customer data like we do here at the insurance agency, we have a lot of data on our clientele, just because it's necessary to quote insurance. Some of the information we have on you, by the way,
I know you can't.
Anyway, this coverage helps you bounce back from cyber disasters. So it's not just about fixing broken systems; it's about surviving the storm. Cyber liability insurance covers the cost of responding to a cyber attack, also covers recovering lost data, handling legal fallout, and rebuilding trust with your audience or clients. Think of it, Lila, as crisis management toolkit for the digital age. Nothing is really done these days unless it's done on a computer.
Right.
That's so much information out there. This is actually a policy that was not even around when I got into.
Yeah.
No, we had no such policy existed.
There was no reason to have it.
Right, exactly. Let me go over real quick exactly what it covers, because I think it's very important, especially the day and age we live in today. It has data breach response. Part of this policy has that. And that means it'll notify affected customers and offering credit monitoring and managing fallout for these clientele should their information get broken into.
Okay.
Another thing this policy would cover would be legal fees and settlements, which means it would cover lawsuits or fines or just legal defense costs. So when a company has a data breach, chances are they're going to have a class action lawsuit if the company's big enough, or even an individual lawsuit. This particular policy would cover legal fees, things like that. Another thing this policy covers is forensic evidence. That means it would pay for experts to find out how the breach happened and what exactly was compromised. So a lot of times when there is a breach, you have to actually hire experts to come in and find out exactly what information was leaked and where it was leaked to. This particular policy would reimburse a particular company for that expense. Also covers business interruption, which is pretty self-explanatory. If for whatever reason your business is not able to operate because of a data breach or cyber liability, this particular policy would cover that expenses, or the income you might have lost because your business was unable to operate. One thing which people don't expect, what happens a lot, is cyber extortion. A lot of people steal information, not so much to share it, Lila, but to actually try to use it as ransom, to get a ransom. Believe it or not, some of these cyber liability policies would cover the actual ransom to regather your information, to recoup your information. And finally, cyber liability would cover public relations and crisis management. A lot of times when particularly a large corporation has information stolen, there's a data breach, they need to get out in the public and explain to the public why it happened and what they're doing to rectify it, and really to save grace. So a lot of times they will hire a PR firm. A cyber liability policy would actually reimburse them for whatever expense they might have for PR firms or any kind of crisis management. So that's basically in a nutshell what a cyber liability policy would cover. Now, did I make any sense at all?
Yeah. And again, it's, 30 years ago in 1990, I got out of college and my first job was working for a commercial real estate firm in research. And I had a pen and a stack of sheets where I had to call every industrial broker once a quarter for information, just updated information on their open spaces for lease or sale. And I had a phone. So I had a phone, a stack of sheets, and a pen. And so something like this wouldn't apply at all to what we were doing 30 years ago. I finally got a computer a year later when I got promoted to the next job up. But it just makes me think, as you were talking about this, like we both said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this was, if you had said something like this to me 30 years ago when I started that job, I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. So it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything else. Everything's automated. Everything's computerized. You need a policy. So it's not all about insurance. It's not all about homes or cars or even construction or business. Now it's moved into the digital age. Yeah, protecting that. So, and I bring that up, Lila, because of who our guest was. And actually, we'll find out here in a little bit, but our guest actually had a particular instance where she was accused of stealing digital information. Yeah. So we'll get into that and a whole bunch more with her. And I can't wait because her story is incredible. Yeah. So let's talk to her when we get back, Lila. You've been listening to Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas, and we'll be right back.
In Texas, the road is part of who we are. From Dallas traffic to Hill Country back roads, you need coverage that keeps up. At Northwest Insurance Agency, we're proud to serve Texans with the best home, auto and business insurance paired with honest rates, real protection, and local agents who understand life around here. Call us for a quote at 1-855-887-5656 or visit us at nwagencies.com.
Okay, we are back on Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas with Mark and Lila. Lila, I can't wait to introduce our guest. She has such an exciting story, and she literally can correlate with cyber liability because of an incident happened to her. But let me get into her biography real quick. If you've ever wondered what it's like to chase murderers for a living while dodging newsroom egos and deadline chaos, Claire St. Amant has lived to tell the tale. A native Texan with a nose for the gritty and the gripping, Claire carved her way from local reporting to the national spotlight, producing over 20 episodes of 48 hours and contributing to 60 Minutes. Her memoir, Killer Story, is a behind-the-scenes thrill ride through the cutthroat world of true crime television, where she shared space with cold-blooded killers and outwitted skeptical cops. She's also the voice behind the podcast, Final Days on Earth. And if you think her stories are wild, wait until you hear how she got me. Claire doesn't just report the news, she wrestles it into submission, one killer story at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, Lila and insurance lurkers across the world, please help me in welcoming true crime producer, author, professor, and podcaster, Claire St. Amant. Hey, Claire, how are you doing?
Thank you so much for the very generous introduction.
Oh, I mean, your story is incredible. I mean, you're so impressive. The first thing I want to just thank you for coming, driving all the way out here into Denton. We record here in Denton for people that don't know, and sometimes it can be a little rough drive or a little lengthy drive. So thank you for that. Second of all, the first thing that came to mind when I read your book, and I'm almost through it, is the word gritty and tenacity.
Such tenacity.
That, if anything I got from that book is not so much I did get a lot from the work you did because that's impressive in itself, but I'm so impressed with your tenacity and your grit. Let's get into your story. Tell me, where were you born? Where did you come from?
Yeah, so I'm native Texan. I was born right here in Dallas, and then I grew up outside Houston in Katy. Go Tigers.
Yeah, and then you went to college here in Texas.
I did. I went to Baylor University. After that, I went to the Peace Corps in Yang,
Which all of that you just said, being from Texas, going to Baylor and being in the Peace Corps has served you very, very well.
Yes.
And in all of your reporting and hitting walls that you hit and being able to maneuver from them. So, yeah.
And what led you into the Peace Corps, if you don't mind asking?
Sure. It was someone who came and spoke to my high school and talked about, the exciting life of a Peace Corps volunteer and getting to live abroad and, spread world peace and friendship. I think my idealistic nature thought that sounded like a great job description. So it was something that I really had, on my bucket list to do at some point. And, whenever I graduated from college, it was 2008. Really bad economy time. Newspapers, journalism jobs were not hiring. And I thought, I think this is a sign that I should go into the Peace Corps right out of college. So that's what I ended up doing. And I taught English as a foreign language in Ukraine.
So have you always had that adventure spirit? Because that's not a something we all look towards right after graduation. We have just joined the Peace Corps.
Right. I have. I had traveled just a little bit, domestically. And then in college, I had gone to South America, done some mission trips there through Baylor and some other Christian organizations, and just really loved the feeling of being abroad and of learning about another culture and getting to share my knowledge and skills. And teaching English, is something that a lot of countries really desire, native English speakers. And so, I just felt like, the idea of graduating from college and owning nothing but the duffel bag, beside me, just to me sounded fabulous.
And having read your book and knowing what you've gone through in your career, I'm sure that served you well for not being afraid of uncomfortable situations.
I had no idea how much, the Peace Corps would prepare me for the workforce, for journalism, for media, just the idea of thinking on your feet, and improvising and problem solving and looking at things, from a different perspective, kind of flipping everything on its head, definitely came into play a lot in my, career as a true crime
Teacher's course on that at this point.
I read that in the book and it stood out. I mean, it really wasn't, you didn't go into it too much, but I just thought it came back around when you met somebody who was also in the Peace Corps, and we'll get into that. But I just thought that was really impressive. Right off the bat, she was in the Peace Corps. So you moved to Dallas, you mentioned because you married.
Correct.
And you started working at the People's newspaper.
Yes.
And how did that come about? Were looking to get into journalism, journalism?
I was looking everywhere. Yeah. So I had a degree in English and a minor in journalism. And I had written, I freelanced all over the place while I was in the Peace Corps. I wrote for the Wall Street Journal. And I came back, I did some thesis for the Houston Chronicle. But finding full-time employment in journalism at that time, was really difficult.
What year was that?
That would have been 2010.
Okay.
And I was looking for a job. Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, it was still pretty challenging. Yeah. So I was in the Peace Corps for about a year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I was applying jobs all over the place, everywhere that I could find a job with a writing application. I really wanted to work full-time at journalism. But I was just kind of casting a wide net, and I actually ended up turning down, a job in PR right before I got the job at People Newspapers. I didn't have any other offers, but I was just had this feeling in my gut, if I take this job, I'm not going to have the career that I want. I'll have a great career. I'll make, good money. I'm sure I'll make a difference in the companies that I work at. But it just wasn't my calling, And so I ended up, I was about to send in my social security number and all the new hire paperwork, and I remember standing there with my social security card in my hand, and I was just I can't do this. And I actually called my fiance, we're both trying to get jobs so we can get married and move out of our parents' houses.
Right.
And I was I can't do this job. I can't.
You just knew.
I just knew. And so I was still freelancing, and I had money from the Peace Corps. They give you a readjustment allowance when you come back.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
And so I was just I'm going to move to Dallas. I'm going to get the cheapest apartment I can find, and I'm going to get a job at journalism. And that's, what I ended up doing. So yeah, I got the offer from People Newspapers, which is owned by D Magazine. So it's a really fantastic company to land at for my first job in journalism, and get to work in downtown Dallas at one of the big skyscrapers. You've seen the big red D. So it's iconic. So I was very excited to be, part of this media empire.
Right. And so originally, what kind of stories were you writing there?
Yeah, I was writing everything. So as a, general assignment reporter, you're covering real estate, you're covering the city council meeting, the school board meeting, when a little old lady turns 100 and has a birthday party. You're doing her.
I know People's Magazine caters to different areas of Dallas.
Yeah.
Am I right? So were you in charge of all of the areas of Dallas?
So at the time that I was there was Park Cities people,
Right.
Preston Hollow people, and Oak Cliff people.
Okay.
And I was the reporter for Preston Hollow people. So each newspaper had one dedicated reporter. And we would try to write, I'm going to say, it was 5 stories a week. And then we would see if there was a way that one of our stories could also go in the other paper, so they could kind of double dip a little bit. But yeah, so I was covering it all, and the police blotter. So that was really my gateway drug into true crime journalism, was just getting, the printout of all the crimes that happened in Preston Hollow. And it was fascinating.
Did one stand out that got you going, started in this path, or?
Well, it was really, just seeing that all of this information was just there in black and white. The other stories that I was trying to come up with, I was having to really dig and find and develop, versus, oh my gosh, look at this printout. From the police department telling me everything interesting that's happened.
Yeah.
The location, the time, the date, sometimes a phone number, of a complainant or a victim or a witness. And I just was well, I could hit the ground running with these stories. It was interesting to me. Who's, breaking the law, who's, it fascinates me.
At that time, was that when, was there a story in that time period when the women were getting robbed in the parking lot
Yes.
at Whole Foods.
Yeah, so a big problem in sort of that Highland Card, Preston Hall area, was sort of the smash and grabs.
Yeah.
And also carjackings. So that was happening a lot. These violent interpersonal kind of crimes. And so that I remember that coming up. My big story, that I ended up doing for People newspapers and for D Magazine was about the Episcopal School of Dallas, the ESD sex scandal.
Yes.
It's just 2011. But yeah, there was a teacher and a coach at ESD who was, preying on a student and sexually abusing a child post school. It's horrific. And, ended up being a huge criminal and civil case. And so the criminal element of it, he was able to do a plea deal and like a no contest plea deal, which is, kind of getting into the weeds here, but
I didn't do it, but I'm not innocent.
I'm not contesting the charges, right? But I would, we're not going to go to trial. It's a very interesting sort of loophole almost in, the criminal code. So he was allowed to do this no contest plea, had a suspended sentence, was not going to serve any time, for sexual crimes. This is a huge deal. And so the family filed a civil lawsuit. And that's where I came into the case, and I ended up covering the civil trial, which was in Dallas, and ended up being, just an unbelievable case, and ultimately was like over a $9 million jury verdict that year, which was the largest jury verdict in Texas at the time, in that time period. So it was a huge story. And I had found it and had covered it when no one else was really paying attention to the civil case because the criminal was getting all the attention. And I had come to find out that the Dallas Morning News had actually cut their civil courts reporter. So they had laid them off. So
Right.
there was,
Sorry about right place, right time.
so I was the only reporter in the courtroom for opening arguments. I talked about this in the book,
Yes.
what that was like and kind of the trouble I found myself in quite by accident, just by doing my job and covering the case. But, I kind of have a way of finding these interesting stories, and it's been a hallmark of my career.
Well, I definitely, and that's where the word grit and tenacity come in, because throughout your career, you've actually had to find these stories that even when they were presented to you, dug deep and uncovered layers and layers of those stories. Tell me, after you left the People's newspaper, how did that lead into you getting into TV work?
So I ended up going to Culture Map Dallas after People newspapers. It was something I was still working there at People whenever Culture Map came to town, and it was kind of a media wars type situation. So they were poaching people, to start this new website. And so they approached me about being the managing editor of Culture Map Dallas. I think this was like in 2012. And so, at first I was like, oh, I'm so happy where I am and I'm appreciated and I'm getting all these, interesting stories. But I was definitely intrigued at the idea of being, on the cutting edge, doing a digital product, being part of that sort of online media world. And so I ended up changing teams and going over to Culture Map Dallas and was able to cover, investigative cases. So I wanted to do stories that were a little bit longer, a little bit more complicated. Yeah, exactly. And so I ended up doing a series on a home invasion in Keller. Okay. And it was called Did Michelle Williams Get Away with Murder? And, question mark was very important to our legal team to be able to say that. We're just asking, did she? And so I ended up, digging into her background and finding out, that she had just left a trail of destruction in her wake and had lots of people who were willing to talk to me using pseudonyms at the time because she was actually out on bond, So she had called 911, said her husband had been shot by an intruder in their house, and to please come, help soon, send the ambulance, send the cavalry. And when they arrived, first responders discovered that nothing was as Michelle Williams had said. The scene had been staged. There was a smell of bleach in the house. It was really bizarre.
Right.
So it ends up, being this really twisted story. And, she actually had a plea deal. By the time I came to the story, she had a plea deal for deadly conduct, for tampering with evidence in the death of her husband. And I just thought, who gets a plea deal for murder in Texas?
Yeah.
That's not an easy thing to do.
Right.
And so I ended up, looking into her and her previous marriages. And, she had basically conned and manipulated people her whole life, including, the state of Texas, including the Tarrant County District Attorney, who she had fooled into thinking, that she was this sort of damsel in distress. And she'd actually faked like a pregnancy.
Yeah.
It was just the wildest story.
All the details you went into. I was like, there's so many layers
Yeah.
of like psychosis.
And it continues to this day. So I ended up doing, recently a new podcast season on Michelle Williams because she's still up to her old tricks, y'all. Even in prison.
Even in prison?
Even in prison. I won't spoil it, but if you listen to season 3 of Final Days on Earth, you will see what Michelle Williams is doing today.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break. And I do want to get into the book because there's a fabulous book, and then also the podcast and some other stuff just about you and how this whole crime world that you live in. We'll do that and all more after we come back on Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas with Mark and Lila.
In the heart of Dallas, we know that life moves fast. And when it does, you need an insurance company that's as reliable as the city we call home. At Northwest Insurance Agency, we're proud to be a part of the Dallas community, offering customized coverage to protect your home, your car, and your family. Whether you're navigating downtown or enjoying a weekend in the suburbs, we've got you covered every step of the way. We're more than just an insurance company. We're your Dallas neighbor, always here to help. Northwest Insurance, proudly serving Dallas.
Okay, we are back on Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas with Mark and Lila. We've been talking to Claire Saint-Amant. Did I say that right?
Did.
And in practice, I practice all day. And when I read it the first time, I almost blew it. But I hope I didn't disrespect your name, because my last name is impossible to say. Viasana. People butcher that crazy. Anyway, we've been talking to Claire about her career in the true crime world. When we left, we were talking about how you were working for Culture Map, and you were going to tell us about how that led to you getting into the TV industry. Do tell me about that.
Yeah, so my story about Michelle Williams in Keller and her, faked home invasion where she had killed her husband and pretended that an intruder had, perpetrated the crime. Whenever I went into that case and dug deeper and uncovered the truth about her, it ended up getting the attention of all 3 major network true crime shows. And so it was my first experience with true crime television producers. And, it was Dateline from NBC and 2020 from ABC and 48 Hours from CBS who started blowing up my phone and my email, wanting to know more about this case. And I had done something, out of respect for my sources, in that I had used pseudonyms for them, because Michelle Williams at the time was out on the streets and they were very concerned that she could potentially come after them for speaking out. So I had gotten permission from my editors and we'd cleared it. You don't usually change names in a story. It's like something that you do on a, limited basis. But in this case, I had changed almost every name in the story. And so I'd actually bulletproofed my reporting from being stolen by the national media, which they would have very happily done. And, it happens all the time to the local reporter who digs up a story. The national media just comes in and they just do their own version of it. They don't, doesn't have to give credit to the local journalists. But in this case, they were actually beholden to me because I knew who these people truly were.
All the information.
And and they were scared, and I had their phone numbers, and I could, convince them to talk potentially. So it was a bit of a wild ride, but I ended up feeling the most comfortable with CBS News and with 48 Hours. And so they actually sent a producer down from New York to, buy me dinner at Mi Cocina, and convince me to work with them. And so that's what I did. I started out as a consultant on air with 48 Hours for that episode to talk about the Michelle Williams case. And, from there, it was just a match made in murder heaven.
Oh,
And yeah, I started pitching him other stories in Texas. And, before I knew it, I was working full time for them.
Now, when you got that offer, because you said you originally wanted to be in journalism and you wanted to be, right.
Yeah.
Were you jumping at that, or were you kind of frightened, or did I really want to go that direction? Or tell me, what was the mindset then?
Yeah. I think all the best decisions in my life have scared me a little bit.
Yeah.
In just the right way. So, getting married, having a child, starting, a new job. And so I was scared to start working in television. I never saw myself as a TV person. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I didn't even own a television in college.
Probably not.
It was just not part of my, normal everyday routine. And I saw myself, I was an English major, a writer, just kind of in that vein. But television, was going to let me tell these really great stories to a large audience and to tell them in a premium way. And so I jumped into the deep end, with the sharks.
And initially you were still with Culture Map as well, right?
I was doing both for a time. It damn near killed me.
Yeah. In the book, you go into detail with that. I mean, it seemed like it was there was some white knuckling there.
Oh,
trying to
absolutely
balance it all.
Yes. And it's been funny because, this book, it's a memoir, and it really is a tell-all memoir. And I say the person I tell on the most is myself. And so I've heard from a lot of people, some of my former colleagues and bosses at Culture Map that were like, so that's what really happened. And because, of course, you're not telling people, everything that you're doing and why you're doing it and all the inner turmoil that you have as you're going through it. So writing the book really was, cathartic in so many ways to process all of these things that I've done and, look back at these unbelievable stories and events in my career.
I do want to get into the book, but tell us a little bit. You ended up having kind of a lengthy career in there, 48 hours, and you covered all kinds of incredible cases. Tell us about some of the cases you were ever to produce, some of the stories, that you were able to produce while there 48 hours.
Yeah. So, I covered a cold case kidnapping in Colorado, a serial killer in South Carolina. I covered mass shootings in Florida and the Dallas police shooting, Sear. And, it was just a really unbelievable job to have. I, would fly into whatever national calamity had, just taken place, often with a one-way ticket. And, my assignment was to get the story, to get people to sit down. We say, get them in the chair,
Right.
Get them on camera, get the, tape rolling. And so I would convince people to talk to CBS News, to talk to us exclusively, to talk to us first, usually about, the hardest day of their life, about the most difficult thing that had ever happened to them.
The way that you were in the book, the way that you described it, that you were able to do it and you were able to come at it from different angles. And I really like that. You were really innovative. You really thought about it. Okay, well, this is happening here in Texas, so I can use my Texas angle, or talking to somebody and finding out, oh, they were in the Peace Corps also.
Yeah.
There was a shooting, a school shooting that you covered that really in the book, when you interviewed David Hawk.
Yeah.
It was Parkland. Right.
Yes.
And can you tell us about that? Because that was really, I came away from it. It was it seemed like it was extremely intense for you, that situation.
Yes, it definitely was. I always say that, Parkland broke me. It was the beginning of the end for me in true crime television, just because of how intense it was. And, for me, being that close to all of that raw trauma was just something that I was not prepared for. I don't think anyone could really be prepared for. But, I flew in. It was Valentine's Day when the shooting occurred, and ended up staying there a week and, working the story for CBS for the morning show, the evening show, and also 48 hours. But it was just an unbelievable time. And I look at, what was going on at Parkland when I was there, and I just it's hard to believe, what those kids went through, and I think that they've done an incredible job of working through that trauma, and the Never Again movement that David Hogg and his district created, and some of the other students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, that they've really taken on this mantle, of how to address gun violence.
That story was so high profile. There's no need to dig up information about that. Tell us about some of these other stories that you covered. You really, when I was reading the book, I envisioned you as an old school reporter, going door to door and with the press down on the house, because you really did digging. Tell us about how you would find out about some of these cases, and then some of the, things you might have had to done to get to where you needed to be.
Sure. So, yeah, my least favorite kind of story is like the pack journalism, a story that everyone's covering, the big, as exciting as it can be to be part of, whatever the major crime story of the day is. I would prefer to actually uncover my own story. And so I would, be reading local newspapers all across Texas to try to find out what was going on in these small towns that, people might not be paying attention to. I would, talk to people that I knew that lived all over the country and ask them, if they knew about cases in their community that were unsolved, that were new, that were interesting, that people were talking about. Really worked my sources to find, these underreported stories. And a lot of times, it would come through police officers, attorneys, people who had just like their ear to the ground for these kinds of cases. And so I would look for, a case where you had, kind of some early inklings of this could be a really
Rumleys. Any particular ingredients you look for? Like, this needed to have this.
Yeah, I looked for multiple suspects.
Okay.
I looked for a murder where people had different theories, where it wasn't so cut and dry. And I liked, whenever there was someone in the story, whether it's an investigator or a family member or, possibly a suspect who's saying, oh, no, you don't know the real story. Yeah. Like, let me tell you what's really going on.
There was one in particular, it was when Hurricane Harvey through, right? And that one really, in the book, it grabbed your interest because it was... Go into some detail with that, because that was really interesting. There was the hurricane, so everyone was focused on that, but yet you found this case.
Yeah, so I'm from Katy, so a lot of people, in the Houston Baytown area, I'm connected to, and I was actually on Facebook that someone shared a flyer with.
Wow.
For a missing woman, and her name was Crystal McDowell. She was missing in the middle of the hurricane. And, they had a picture of her car that had, her last known whereabouts. And the family, I remember, told me that they couldn't even get a hold of the sheriff's office because the phone was disconnected because they were underwater. And I thought, that can't be true. So I dialed up the sheriff's department. And what do I get? Dude, I'm sorry. This number is no longer in service. And I'm like, well, that's never happened before. Yeah. And so I really started from the position of, well, I want to help them get in touch with law enforcement. Like, this is something I should be able to do. And so I actually used, like a CBS subscription to go and to get people's personal information and get, a cell phone number for the sheriff and called him up. And he was aware of this case of the missing woman. But I was able to say, hey, the family thinks that you don't know about this case yet, and they're trying to call the main number. Let me connect you so that, everyone can be clear that the sheriff's department is working this case. They are looking for this missing woman. And, once I kind of had my foot in the door with them, I started thinking, oh, we could really follow this missing person investigation in real time in the middle of this hurricane. And we have so many, CBS personnel on the ground covering the weather. There's probably a way to divert some people.
Two birds, one stone.
Yeah. And this was 2017. And so remote work was not really a thing. People weren't, familiar with that. And here I was in Dallas. I couldn't get to Baytown, to do this interview that night. But I was just field producing remotely which was, all new back then, but now is old hat. Everybody does it. But yeah, so I was able to arrange, for some CBS camera people and producers to go with law enforcement, and record things behind the scenes. And, it ended up being a huge story for CBS News, and, ended up being very widely covered, across all media, because unfortunately, she was found, her body, was found. She was not a victim of the storm. Her husband had killed her and then had used the storm to cover it all up, which was pretty diabolical. So yeah, but that was an example of, a story that I had no idea where it was going, but it felt like, there was enough there that I should pursue it.
I just felt like it was so interesting because it could have just fallen to the wayside because of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And then how, as you just said, the husband tried to hide it under the guise of the hurricane.
Yes.
Real quick, we spoke about cyber liability today, and I brought it up because one of the cases you dealt with, you were actually accused of stealing evidence from the courtroom. Do you mind telling that story?
Sure.
And tell us about that?
Yeah. So I was in Travis County. I was covering a serial killer murder trial, a capital murder trial. And it was there were these two landscapers basically that had been casing houses, and they were breaking into their clients' homes, after hours, and they had killed 3 people. It's really horrific, and of course, terrifying for people in Austin. And so, it took a long time for Austin Police Department to figure out what was going on, but they had put the pieces together, and they were on trial. And so I had, been following this case for years, and I was really, looking forward to getting it to have its day in court and getting to be there and see how everything's going to go down. And so, we had arranged to have cameras in the courtroom, which is something that a lot of people might not realize. You don't just get every time. You have to ask the judge, you have to get it approved, it's a whole process. And so we were actually, we had gone in the night before the trial, and we had been in the courtroom setting up our cameras, getting the angles right, getting everything together. And the next day, whenever I got to court, I thought, here we go. We're here for opening arguments, but I had no idea what was really in store. And, the judge ends up putting the court in recess pretty early on, and says, there's something the court needs to deal with. And then the judge just leaves. I'm like, what's happening? This is very unusual. And it ended up, that the Travis County District Attorney's Office investigators, they had surrounded me and my camera crew. And they were like, we need to talk to you, actually. I'm like, okay, about what? I'm just totally curious. So what's going on here? I had no fear, had no inclination, this thing. Yeah, nothing. And they were like, you stole something and you need to give it back to us. And yeah, I couldn't have been more surprised by, what they were accusing us of. But it eventually comes out that the, evidence, the flash drive of all the evidence in this capital murder trial had gone missing. And me and my camera crew had been in the courtroom the night before. And so naturally, we must have taken. And they wanted to search our bags. They wanted to search my laptop. And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Where's your subpoena? Where's your warrant? You're not getting any of this. So, I had to call, of course, CBS, legal department in New York and explain what was going on. And it was a pretty fraught situation. And we were actually detained in that courtroom for many hours while, lawyers kind of hashed out what they were going to do. But I won't spoil the story. But yeah, I'm here today and not behind bars. So
probably where that Peace Corps improvisation came along handy.
Yes.
And how we had to think on your feet.
Right.
That's just one of the great stories she has in the book, Lila, about all the investigative approach and so many things she has to bear through just to produce a story that came on TV. I would take a quick break. I do want to revisit the book again and have her promote, but you have an event coming up pretty soon that we'll talk about.
Yeah, and your podcast.
And your podcast. So much more to talk about with Claire. So we'll be right back on Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas with Mark and Miles.
Running a business is unpredictable, but with the right insurance, you can face the unexpected with confidence. At Northwest Insurance Agency, we protect what matters most: your people, your property, and your future. Whether it's liability, property, or workers' comp, we tailor coverage to fit your business needs. Because when you're covered, you can focus on what really matters: growing your business. Call us today for a free quote at 1-855-887-5656 or visit us at nwagencies.com. Northwest Insurance Agency, protection that works as hard as you do.
Okay, we are back on Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas with Mark and Lila, here with Claire Sanama. Claire, we were talking to you about one of your many adventures, about how you almost got arrested for quote unquote stealing evidence. You also had another story, and I tell these stories because the book is so interesting. I want everyone to pick up a copy of the book, and I'm going to hold it up. It's called Killer Story. Right here. And you can't miss it when you go to the bookstore. That beautiful pink. I love that. Is that your decision?
Oh, I got to give credit to my publisher. They came up with the power pink, the Barbie pink.
Yeah.
So now I'm just owning it.
And she even brought us a little prop here that promotes the book. Yeah. Too bad it's not real, Lila. It's not real. Another story that you had in the book, Claire, was about how you were covering a doctor who was accused of murdering his wife. Is that correct? And you ran into him at one point, and he invited you back to his house.
Right.
And flesh that out a little.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So, one of the biggest lessons I learned from working in true crime television: never go with a suspected murderer to a second location. So I didn't know that yet, but I learned it the hard way. So yeah, we had gone to lunch, and he was offering to show me some pictures of his late wife, and like some very tantalizing elements that would help us tell the story, that he said he had at home and he could get me copies of. And I think I just didn't want to admit that I was afraid. I wanted to get the goods, as a producer. I wanted to didn't want to come back empty-handed. And he's like, our house is just right down the street. He actually tried to get me to go in the car with him, which I was like, no, I'm definitely going to drive my own car, which I did. And
creepy vibes right off the bat. You're a creepy guy.
It was a little creepy.
Okay.
Yeah, there was just something unsettling. I talk about in the book how he went unprompted, like, into details of his sex life and like things he liked, and it was bizarre. Here we are having brunch at like 11 a.m., in a crowded restaurant, and he's telling me literally
He's already been accused of murdering his wife, and he's telling you things that are he didn't act. Yeah.
Right. So he wasn't a suspect technically. It was very interesting. This case, was a woman who had died, in her own backyard pool. And, so he police had publicly said, that he was no longer a suspect. He had at one time been suspected, but I've also seen investigators very deftly use, press conferences and other media statements to say that people aren't suspects, to get them, put their guard down, so that they relax. And, just because they say it to the press doesn't mean that it's like,
so that's when I still in the book, and I was like, oh, that was kind of a light bulb moment when you talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, take it all with a grain of salt. It's never over till you're, gavel down, here's the verdict. But so at the time, I considered him a suspect in my mind. And there'd been no arrests, no charges, anything like that. But I ended up going back, to his house with him, and got, up to the front door and started to go, into the entryway. And I remember the house was dark, and he was like, just follow me, like, it's back here. And my legs just wouldn't move. I was frozen in place. I've never felt like that before, but I just felt like I had to get out of there. And so I made up an excuse. I said, oh my gosh, look at the time. I have another meeting. I forgot I'm supposed to be somewhere. And I just marched out of that house. And, that was a feeling I never wanted to have again. And so I made a rule for myself, to try to never be alone with a suspected murderer again, to bring some backup, bring another producer. And yeah, it was a really scary moment for me, and definitely a learning moment too.
Yeah, I'm glad you did go in that door. I can only imagine what was on the other side of that doorway. You did some time after you left 48 hours with 60 Minutes. You moved across. You talked about moving across the street for a different division.
Yeah.
And there was one story that Lila was really interested in. The title of that story was called "The Ranger and the Serial Killer." And you had a couple questions for.
Yeah, you made an unbelievable jump to producing this piece for 60 Minutes. So tell us a little bit about that, because it is very fascinating the way you were able to do it.
Yeah, I never imagined that I would produce stories for 60 Minutes. It was not something I had on my bingo card.
You weren't thinking about that when you were over wherever you were in the Peace Corps.
I really wasn't, and I wasn't even thinking about it when I was at CPS, like
48
a
hours.
lot of people are. But I was just really trying to tell the best stories I could, and the most interesting ways that I could. And I had met this Texas Ranger through my work at 48 Hours, and he was telling me about a serial killer that I'd never heard of, named Samuel Little. And he was out in California, and he had confessed to killing 93 people. And that is an astronomical number. Of victims. And, it would make him the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States. And so I had this really tantalizing exclusive because, this hadn't been announced yet. And so the Texas Rangers, the Department of Justice, and the FBI were planning to make an announcement about Samuel Little being the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States, and asking for the public's help in identifying, some of his victims, because he hadn't, even though he had confessed these crimes and he told investigators everything he could remember, he didn't have their first and last name and their date of birth. And, so a lot of people were still unidentified. They had bodies, they had bones, they had remains, but they didn't know who these women were. And so the authorities really wanted to go forward with like an exclusive media partner. And it just happened to be because I had met, this Texas Ranger through actually the Hurricane Harvey, Crystal McDowell case.
Oh, through that case.
Yeah, through that, right? So he had gotten the confession from the killer in that case. And so we had come to know each other at that trial. And so he tells me about Samuel Little. And I'm like, wow, this is an incredible story. I want to try to get it on 48 Hours. I work for a true crime show. I have an exclusive about a serial killer. This will be easy, right? It was not easy. So it ended up being, a story that my bosses did not want for 48 Hours. It was really hard for them to imagine, how are we going to tell a story about 93 victims in 1 hour? How are we going to talk about a serial killer that spans the entire United States, that operated for over 30 years, in an hour? We have a 48 Hours sort of formula. I talk about this in the book too, where we, tell one story, one victim, one killer, and we go through it, in the allotted amount of time, and we go to the trial and we have the conviction, and, everything kind of fits. And this story just didn't fit. And so it was something that my bosses said, well, this is interesting. Thanks for bringing it to us, but we're going to pass. And I was like, well, what do I do now? Because I know that this story, every, part of my, journalist DNA, every part of my storytelling. Yeah, I was like, this is a massive story. And so I just couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to get it on CBS News in some way. Because I knew I'd see it on NBC or ABC, and I'd be like, that was my exclusive. I let that story go. And I was like, well, if that happens, I'm going to make sure that everybody at CBS knows that they had their chance at this story, and they let it go. So I started pitching it to everyone. I pitched it to the morning show, the evening news. I pitched it to 60 Minutes. I was
Nickelodeon.
Yeah. At the time, I don't even know if, the Paramount universe has expanded, right?
Yeah.
But, so I was pitching it everywhere and just getting rejected left and right, or just hearing nothing. And it got so bad that, my boss was actually like, stop pitching this story. Like, don't you have enough work to do? Right. And it was really getting to the point where I felt like I was pretty close to getting fired, if I didn't drop the story. And I thought, well, I've tried everything else. Why not try one more thing? And so I went straight to the executive producer of 60 Minutes, who was Bill Owens at the time. And I just pitched it to him. I looked up his email, the company directory, and I pitched him my story. And, at this point, I'd been rejected so many times that I had rewritten the pitch, and I'd made it even longer, even more detailed, even more twists and turns. And, he ended up loving it. And quite, to my surprise and delight, he was like, I want to do this story with you. Are you going to tell 48 Hours or should I? And I was like, oh, I'll tell him. This is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. Yeah.
Will be.
So, that's how I ended up working at 60 Minutes. So I did that story on Samuel Little. And then I ended up working with them, on a handful of other stories.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's just amazing because it wasn't, to use your word, on your bingo card. Yeah. But it's on a lot of other people's bingo cards. But boy, it became something big in your career. That's so amazing.
And it also speaks to going back to the word I started out with, tenacity. There's just throughout your career, you just show a willingness not wanting to accept the word no, I guess.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say.
If I have a good story, I'm not going to let go until it's told one way or another.
So many good stories in this book. You have to pick it up. And just real quick for people here that are listening here in Dallas, some of the other stories she covered were the Kaufman murders.
Yes.
The Christina Morris disappearance that's here related here, Dallas. The Chris Kyle murder. So many interesting stories about how the true crime world got to her and how it ended up affecting her, wanting her to get out of the industry. Yeah. A great story. And I want to thank you again for being here. We do have 5 questions that we ask all of.
Oh, before that, though, her upcoming event.
Yes, I'm going to be at Biblio Bar in Plano on July 26th at 5 p.m. for an exclusive ticketed event. So limited seats available. Get your tickets, and you'll get a signed copy of my book, Killer Story, and I'll be in conversation with the manager of Biblio Bar. So I'll be talking all about Killer Story, and it'll be a great night. So July 26th, Biblio Bar in Plano.
Well, that's very thing.
Yeah, great.
And also when we promote this episode, I'll be sure to put it, on social media as well. So yeah, that'll be great.
We're fanboys now.
Yeah, you have to sign up now.
Of course, I will.
Okay, so Claire, we have 5 questions that we always ask our guests. They're all related to Dallas because the name of the podcast is Beyond the Policy, covering everything Dallas. So we'll have Lila ask the first one, and just whatever comes into your mind, throw Trancy.
Okay, so you live here in Dallas, and you've lived here a long time. What is your favorite place for Tex-Mex? Your favorite restaurant for Tex-Mex, and what's your go-to order when you go there?
Okay, so I already said their name once in this episode, but it's Mi Cocina, brisket tacos.
Oh, yes. So good. Yeah, a classic. It is.
Good answer. Okay, same question, but with barbecue.
Ooh, so gosh, that's a tough one. There's a lot of good ones. I'm going to have to go with Heart 8 in Capel. And I do the brisket there too. Yeah. So the sliced brisket.
I was going to say chopped or sliced.
Slice.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Now, here's the guess.
I'll always mess up.
I always mess up the wording.
She'll ask it the first time, they'll come in and repeat it correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So who do you think is the best coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
In the history of the Cowboys franchise, who is
See, I said it right.
Yeah.
Green Plus.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd probably just have to go Tom Landry. Classic. Yeah. I'm not looking to get controversial here. Yeah. I think that I would go Tom Landry.
I had you pegged as a Bill Parcells.
I did not. I definitely. She is a classic, and she thinks classically.
Okay, in your opinion, was the JFK assassination done by a lone gunman, or was there a conspiracy?
Oh man, so great question. In my one of my other roles, I'm a professor and I teach a podcasting class, and one of my student shows was actually a conspiracy theory show, and they did a fascinating episode on the JFK bypass. So they thought it was the Russians were involved. They went full tilt, like full down.
I have evidence
down the rabbit hole. I mean, they cited a lot of different things that have come up in the past. I give them credit for for finding their sources. I think it's a little far-fetched. The Russians were involved in it personally. I do think, when you look at the trajectory of the bullet and, the physics and everything else, I think there's room to believe that there was a second shooter. But I don't go as far as to say that the Russians were involved. I think we'll leave right out of it.
If I pin you down, the answer is you think yes, it was a conspiracy.
I like to think that there's more to the story than we.
I'm sure you'd investigate it.
Yeah.
That's the next book. Go back,
There you go.
Jessica, and tell us the truth. Okay, last one.
I'm gonna ask the last
Do
one.
it.
Okay, so if you were gonna pick a person who represents Dallas, they can be living or dead, who would that be?
I think I would go with Mark Cuban.
Oh, really?
I feel like,
It is.
is it? All right. I think, he's not afraid to say what he thinks. He's definitely like a stylish guy. I think he makes some bold, business decisions. He's savvy. I when I think of Dallas, I think Mark Cuban, really comes to mind.
Yeah, that's a first. But I'm a little disappointed you didn't say me, but okay. All right.
Well, Claire, I want to thank you again for being here. I mean, the stories you have are incredible. I hope everyone who listens.
Y'all need to pick up this book.
It's really great.
Y'all need, I got mine you can get it on Amazon.
Yep.
I also got another copy at Barnes and Noble.
I do one better. I bought it and audio bought.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
Yeah, sir. Yeah. What do you think about that, Lila?
It's not better. Okay.
Oh, Claire, thank you again for being here. And anytime you want to come back, you're more than welcome. Maybe when you do your next book,
Yeah.
your next podcast. And please, if you're out there, listen to her podcast too, and that's called
Final Days on.
Final Days Learned. Okay. We'll be back next time on Beyond the Policy, covering again everything Dallas with Mark and Lila. Thanks for listening.